All right. So today we're going to be actually jumping into building things we will be using throughout the module. And I have some fun music to go with it today. So before I begin, music volume okay? Nailed it, Enrico. Yep, it is Dang It Grandpa.
It's
All right.
pronounced Dangarappa.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, that is a joke name from the Game Grumps. They call it Dang It Grandpa on occasion. Yeah, the theme has been stuck in my head, and I thought it would fit this kind of mood that we're going for today with the sanitarium. So we're getting into architectural modeling. So again, we're thinking man-made things, just like you built with your items in your homework. So as true with most of 3D, there are several ways to accomplish a particular look or shape. In Maya, this is especially true. When you are looking at mounds of research, you will have done before a project and are trying to plot out how to model a particular shape. There will actually be quite a few methods that will present themselves. Picking which tools you want to use and which ones are best for what you want to do for that situation is key. In order to efficiently pick the best method, it is important to understand a bit of how 3D software works and how we see what we see when we're looking at 3D forms. The polygon. So figure 3.1, we'll take a closer look at that in a minute, is a portrait of the star of the 3D show, the polygon. The polygon is both the star and the smallest of players. It is what all forms that we see are made of. So we have the vertices. A single one is called vertex. On the ends here, these little points. We have edges, which are these kind of lines that surround the polygon. We have the face, which is the solid side we see, and the normal tells us which side is the front side of polygons, essentially. Parts. Polygons have several component parts, which we referred to in the last chapter. Remember, we right-click and held and access that hot box. These components are labeled in 3.1, so let's talk about them for a minute. The face is what we intuitively think of as the polygon. It's the surface that we actually see. While it has a width and height, it also has no depth. It is infinitely thin. A normal is a polygon's front. The simplest way to think of this is that the polygon has a front and a back, and the normal by default runs perpendicular to the front of the face. So it makes a T. Perpendicular is at a 90-degree angle to it. This can be a little abstract until it's seen in action, which we will examine in a little bit. But this becomes very important in situations like game creation because games, in order to draw things faster, don't draw the back of polygons. They're invisible. So if the normal of a polygon is facing the wrong way and is showing up black on your screen, it'll render out invisible, but the polygon isn't seen within a game engine either. Normals can be further tough to understand because they aren't shown by default when selecting a component and can be a little obscure to control. We won't have to do too much of that, thankfully. Not to worry, though, we'll spend a good time talking about them and especially getting them to face the direction that they need to. It's really easy. It's just going into one menu and pressing one button to get them to flip. Edge. A face is surrounded by edges. These edges define the limitations of the polygon and the face. These edges also exist within 3D space, but actually contain no geometry of their own. They simply help describe the geometry of the polygon. When an edge is moved, rotated, or scaled, it changes the shape of the face and thus the polygon. Vertex. Each edge has a vertex on either end of it. Vertices are one-dimensional components that exist in 3D space. When a vertex is moved, one vertex cannot be scaled or rotated. It changes the length of the edges and is part of, thus changing the shape of the polygons those edges contain. Do note that a collection of vertices can be rotated or scaled, which is really simply moving their relative location to one another. UVs. These are less of a what and more of a where. They are a coordinate system that allows Maya or any 3D program to know how to attach a texture to a collection of polygons. They are not particularly modifiable in 3D space, and they really need to be handled in 2D space, most particularly in something we call texture space. Much more on this later. Again, the normals here, if we're seeing the black side, that is the eighth wonder of the world, the backside of a polygon. Traits of a polygon. To understand what polygons are and how they look, consider this metaphor. Polygons are very thin, but rigidly strong, like adamantium, vibranium, impossibilium, whatever other metals Marvel has created for their characters. An individual polygon cannot bend. It is planar. It is flat and it is hard. It doesn't bend. However, multiple polygons can be joined along their edges, and they can bend where they connect, right? Think of this as hinges. Every polygon where it meets another polygon has a hinge, and you can rotate that hinge or push and pull the points of that hinge or the edges of that hinge. What this means is that if you take 6 polygons and attach them together so that they share edges and vertices, you get a cube. Increase the number of polygons and the number of places where the shape can bend increases. This means a form can become more round as the polygon count increases. So from 6 faces to 25 polygons, 25 faces to 400 faces. Right, see the difference? But notice that even the seemingly smooth sphere on the far right is still made up of non-bending polygons. Check out the close-up of that sphere here. See the edges of those polygons? You know, it's a straight line, then a straight line, and a straight line. Poly counts. So what does this mean for us? Well, polygons are not only the building blocks of shapes, but also the building blocks of the data set that the computer must keep track of for any shape or scene. Especially in situations like games, this data set can be hugely important when considering frame rates, the rate in frames in a second at which the video card is able to display the information of a scene. Too many polygons and the computer simply can't process them, and the video card can't draw them fast enough to allow for any sort of meaningful gameplay. To be fair, poly count, the number of polygons in a scene, is rarely the most limiting factor in gameplay. Textures and dynamic shadows actually have a bigger influence on that with today's hardware. But get too many polys, and even the most robust systems can ground to a halt in both games and inside of Maya as the scene is being manipulated. Thus, the age-old dilemma and the craft of good 3D is to use as many polygons as absolutely needed to describe a form and no more. How many is too many? The answer is tough and is really a moving target. Too many for my machine as I'm writing this may be different for your machine. And when you read this, not long ago, a scene with 1 million polys was way too many to work with. And today that's almost a trivial amount. So the question is, it depends. I know, terribly unsatisfying, but along the way in our tutorials, we will always be keeping our eye on efficient use of polys so that we can ensure a project that is the most useful on the most machines. Modeling modes. No, wait a minute, you might be saying, I've done some 3D and I know that there are things like NURBS and sub-D surfaces and that there are 3D forms that aren't polygons, are they? This can be a bit confusing, especially on Maya. Maya does have a polygons mode that allows for users to create polygons directly. It also has some other modes that are involved in making shapes, particularly like surface modes, which have an entirely alternate collection of tools that also create shapes. It would seem like this indicates that there are other forms besides polygonal. But here's the deal. When a computer draws the shape and displays it on the monitor, the only shape it sees are polygons, and particularly 3-sided polygons called tries. All of the modeling techniques in Maya, either polygonal or NURBS or subdiv surfaces, which is subdivision, are simply ways of creating and manipulating collections of polygons, triangular polygons. The video card sees these triangular polygons regardless of how they were arranged in Maya's various modeling modes and displays them accordingly. The process of converting a model into all tries, is called tessellation. Well, you can see here how it actually reads it. So even though we're seeing, these are the same shapes as before these, see how the computer is seeing triangles even though we're working in quads? So the back of its mind, it is converting that. One moment here. It's for this reason that polygonal modeling has remained a constant, reliable choice when tackling modeling challenges. Since the final product is going to end up polygons, creating the forms from easy to manipulate polygons often yields the most reliable results at rendering time. But it's not always the best solution to find a form. I'm a huge fan of polygonal modeling, but at the end of the day, polygonal modeling is not as direct as it may seem. Because even the polygons that polygonal modeling creates are, in actuality, tessellated. It is still a bit indirect, and sometimes things like NURBS simply create a better form more quickly. Often the tessellation issues are easy to manage with other forms of modeling, and in fact, we will be using other forms of modeling throughout the book when they are the more efficient path. Here's the thing though, when we're working in animation, we absolutely do not want to use anything other than 4-sided polygons. We don't want to use triangles. We don't want to use hexagons. We don't want to use octagons. If you have anything that is more or less than 4 sides, it will cause your model to break. It will also make it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to UV map. So not only can't you apply textures correctly, you won't be able to rig it correctly either. We'll have errors. So when we're working, we're going to work really, really hard to make sure that these shapes stay 4 sides and that they only have 4 vertices each. 4 edges, 4 vertices, no more, no less. This can be really, really challenging, and I'll point out some of those pitfalls, especially with the multi-cut tool, when we get there, and some other solutions as to how we can get the same result while still maintaining quads at all times. But enough talk. Let's start building stuff. I'm sure we're all itching to do that, especially after the past 2 days of a lot of sitting and listening. So, escaping the madness. This is our fictitious game in which you, the player, have been institutionalized because of your insistence on the guilt of a local politician and the recent disappearance of several youth in the community. Your goal is to escape the sanitarium and prove his guilt. The rub is, you're actually a little crazy and tend to see things as much more dire than they really are. Because of this, the mental hospital that you're currently held at appears to you as run down and abandoned. To you, the walls are crumbling, the rooms are abandoned, the orderlies are all brain-sucking drug dealers, zombies, what have you. And the doctors are all monstrous scientists, and your fellow patients' inmates are in a hellish prison. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to build this game. It's well beyond the scope of this book and definitely animation class. However, we will be building a section of the mental hospital you are trying to escape. In this chapter, we will be creating all of the geometry for one level of the game. Rather, the building generally, and then one room will flesh out is what it'll get at. Through the course of this tutorial, we will use polygonal and NURBS-based modeling techniques. Since this is a game level, poly count will be important, but this doesn't mean that the forms will be simple. Although the walls, windows, and furniture will appear gray, we should still be able to create sophisticated shapes that help convey the terror of space. Here's a render of the completed game level, which we'll get to after UV mapping and texturing. Gathering research. Abandoned sanitariums are actually pretty easy to find online. It means that there is a plethora of great research, easily seen and assembled. Unfortunately, I don't have the rights to reproduce any of this book, but we'll do a quick Google search, image search, and collect images that excite or inspire us. Sometimes this sort of research collection can be about finding images that assist in understanding architectural structure, like how wide are the hallways? What sort of doors are in the facility? What are the shapes of the windows, etc. But it can also help in defining texture choices. Are the walls painted plaster? Are they tile? What color are they, etc. Most importantly, this sort of research can greatly assist in establishing the mood. As I was collecting research for this tutorial, I stopped when I had assembled about 200 images. Pinterest is also really good for this sort of thing. Take a particular look at images with Belitz Hillstatten. There are some great structures in that facility and lots of really beautiful photographs captured by a wide variety of photographers. Generally, the spaces we will be creating are based on the architecture of this facility. So what I'll do here is we will Google this and we'll take a look at some of these pictures here together. So we notice that there's some graffiti. It looks like maybe there's some black mold. There's like watermarks, drip marks, lots of debris on the ground, really, really huge windows with little indents, but very square. And then the top one rounds. Here we have a tile wall. The tiles are dingy. They're splattered mud and gunk all over it. This might be a 3D render, actually. It's a stock photo, but it looks a little wonky. Maybe it's just over edited. Again, graffiti everywhere, trash on the floor, debris on the floor. You know, the wood here is rotting. The metal bed is really rusted away. There we go. There's a more believable photo. You can see there's like tiles missing from the wall. The ground is now just concrete, or it's so dirty we can't tell what was underneath. Here's another part of the building. There's brick walls that have been painted. Obviously, this paint has faded. It's chipping away. It's dingy. It's got grime and dirt and drip marks on it. Here we have a lot of peeling paint. Look at all this peeling paint, debris on the ground. Again, windows with that square design, but then it rounds at the top. So on and so forth. Again, lots of graffiti. Very dusty floors. So let's also look at abandoned mental hospitals and see if we see any other trends. Peeling paint here. It looks like maybe there's like a tarp or just a heck of a lot of dirt on the floor. Again, square windows. Again, highly graffitied. Here the tile on the floor is broken. The hallway is pretty narrow. Again, lots of peeling paint. Lots of indents here on the door frame. Yikes, don't walk there. Again, like we see rust, we see peeling paint. Here we have, it looks like some sort of gravel epoxy floor. We have some tile in the seam foam green that is all dingy and faded. The paint on the ceiling is warped and peeling. Yeah, same thing here. It's all peeling. Either the floor was pulled up with like carpet or whatever when it was abandoned. The furniture here is dingy. We can see where like paint was smeared or rubbed away through overzealous cleaning at one point. Same thing here, rusty metal. Even here, this one that isn't that bad. You can see like there's tiles falling off the ceiling. There's paint missing from the walls. It's got this like kind of gross, sickly mint green color. The floor looks pretty basic. Now, the other thing I want to do here, I'm going to show you some stuff from CSU Channel Islands, because this was a mental hospital. So where I went to university at used to be a mental hospital. And I got fun stories from like spooky things that happened as a student there when you're alone. So what I want to point out here, though, is a lot of the windows that we might be doing here. Is that Scary Dairy? It's what it used to look like. Here's what it looks like now. This is a popular spot to go do photography and filming at. It's supposedly haunted. But here, yeah, we see like painted walls, the windows, shiny floors, probably linoleum. See if I can find a good picture here with the windows. Author. Well, you can see the windows here. This is a Spanish type of architecture that is throughout the campus. The campus is absolutely beautiful, especially with the renovations they've done. But you can see here how it's like a lot of little squares. These are, I find, are really good inspiration when we actually get around to doing the windows in our own little room. Oh, those are new buildings. That's not old. The bell tower's original. The two buildings on either side of the library are original. A lot of this art department has not been updated at all. Fun fact, so we're working in original buildings that have been basically repurposed for art. Here's a kind of bigger overview here of what it used to look like. And fun fact, I can't verify this off the top of my head how true it is. But my dad actually watched a TV interview, and this was before most people had VHS recorders, of the Eagles being interviewed. And they said that Camarillo State Hospital, which is now CSU Channel Islands, was the hospital, if not one of them, that inspired Hotel California. If anyone's familiar with that song. Okay. Okay. Here you can see like some archways. This one looks like it might have had carpet. Just some things from before. Again, here's that mint blue color that was really popular. This one has like some dingy curtains, painted walls. So there's different ways to go about designing anything like this. There's a good picture of one of the doors. Here's kind of a good close-up of the window. You can see how rusty it is. All right, now that we have some mental images in mind, tutorial 3.1. Architectural polygonal game modeling for escaping the madness. So first thing we need to do is we need to set the project. So in the last chapter, we finished things up by creating a new project called Escaping the Madness. And then we set the project to homework room. So we're gonna need to set it back. This Maya project took the form of a folder on your hard drive that included a slew of other folders that defined where certain assets would be stored. This keeps things clear for Maya, so it knows where to find what. When first sitting down to a machine and getting ready to work on a project, always make sure that you are dealing with the right project. Especially if you are a student in a lab situation, it is so easy to inherit someone else's settings and thus inherit the project they've defined. If you start creating and saving assets into the wrong project, paths and connections can be made that will haunt you much later down the line. So always, 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 before we start working, even if we're very confident that we're in the right project folder, we always set the project. So we're going to set the project. To do this, we're going to go to File, Set Project. Make sure the pop-up comes over here. And we're just going to click once on Escaping the Madness. If you don't see Escaping the Madness in Homework Room, you can navigate to there from these sides. And then all you have to do is press Set with Escaping the Madness selected. Right. So why do we do this? Again, setting the project in this way lets Maya know where the parent project folder is, and thus all the children folders that will enable Maya to know where relevant files are. So parent means the main one, children means everything that is inside of it. Warnings and pitfalls. Even when I am working at home, when I sit down and launch Maya, I always set the project before opening anything. Similarly, I never open a Maya file simply by double-clicking from it in the operating system, right? So you wouldn't go into your scenes folder and double-click on a file to open it. I always set the project, and then once I am sure Maya understands what the project is, I use File Open to open the file I am working with. Since we didn't create one yet, we don't have to worry about that. Saving a new scene. We're going to create a new scene in Maya via File, New Scene. So scenes are what people usually think of as Maya files. Maya can keep one or many scenes within the project scenes folder. Okay. So we're going to go to File, New Scene. If you get the warning not saved, just press Don't Save. Okay. We're going to get a brand new scene. Now we're going to save the scene with File Save Scene. This will open a dialog box similar to the one below. Notice that the Look in input field that Maya has automatically taken us to the Scenes folder inside Escaping the Madness. We're going to name this slightly different. And then we'll press the Save button, so I'll show you what that is. So we're going to go to File, Save Scene. Sorry, I got to bring the dialog box over here. And before we do anything, we want to double check it says Scenes and double check it says the correct file name. If it doesn't, we need to go reset the project by going to File, Set Project. But here it is going to the correct spot. So the only thing I need to worry about doing, is down here in File Name. And what we're going to do is we're going to type the date. Okay. ETM for Escaping the Madness. Hallway. _ version 1. So we're going to have a much more methodical save system here. So that way we can keep track of progress every day as well as multiple versions. It is the easiest way to make sure that if something crashes, when it crashes, it will happen. We're losing as little work as possible and that we're able to keep track of all the work we're doing. So we're going to be doing a bunch of different things. Then press Save As, mentioning that for the recording. If you are not taken to the Scenes folder, full stop immediately, it means that Maya does not understand the project yet and doesn't know where things should be stored. Go back and try setting the project again, steps 1 and 2. If this still doesn't work, there may have been an error in how you created the project. So delete the old files and recreate the project just like we did last chapter. If you save this file in some other place besides the location, Maya thinks its scene files should be in your future path of textures and other things, and it will be absolute, and thus you will never be able to share this file with someone else, or it won't open up on another machine without everything breaking, or it will give you grief down the road when we get to more advanced things with the same files. So why are we saving first when there's nothing in the scene? Well, first, this gives you a chance to double check that the project is indeed set right. If Maya takes you to another place but the Scenes folder, you know something is wrong. Second, saving often is just a fact of life when using Maya. Maya is a great application, but crashes are not unusual, and getting into the habit of saving often is critical to minimizing lost time. Everyone deals with Maya crashes, totally normal. Everyone deals with Maya freezes, totally normal. So we want to be really, really proactive and making sure that we're losing as little work as possible because we want to work as smoothly as we can. Laying the foundation. Now it is time to start making geometry, but before we do so, it is worthwhile to point out that there will be things done a little differently than Maya's default settings. For instance, in the last chapter, we did some mini tutorials in which we turned off interactive creation, and we double-checked it was off by default. What this does is that instead of dragging out an object into existence, which is how Maya works by default these days, it creates an object as 0, 0, 0 in world space and usually at the size of 1. But what does 1 mean? 1 what? Well, here's the problem with scale. Units in Maya can be a little tough to work with. By default, Maya is working in centimeters, although we'll change this in a minute. However, it can be a little difficult seeing exactly what the size of an object is. Here's why. In the channel box, the information provided for the selected object is translate X, Y, and Z, rotate X, Y, and Z, and scale X, Y, and Z. Notice that it is scale and not size. What this is referring to is the scale of the object since it was created. This means that an object that was created as 20 feet wide by 20 feet deep by 20 feet tall will show up in the channel box as scale X, Y, and Z 1. Ironically, an object that was created by 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot will also show up as scale X, Y, and Z as 1. See the problem? For this reason, it's for this reason that I like creating objects that are 1 unit in size, as that matches the scale settings. Then if the object is scaled 5 times as big to 5 feet, the scale settings in the channel box will also show 5. It gives us a quicker look at what the size of the object actually is. To be fair, as soon as the components are altered, like moving vertices or faces, the scale setting in the channel box becomes completely inaccurate, since at that point we're reshaping the object but not scaling it. But for early roughs, I like keeping the channel box as relevant as long as I can. It just makes the initial work go faster. So we're going to change our units, and we're going to change them to feet. To do this, we're going to go into Window, Settings and Preferences, and Preferences. In the Categories column, we're going to click Settings, and then in the Working Unit section, we're going to change Linear setting to Foot. Okay, so I believe this is Windows. Windows Setting Preferences, Preferences. And I'll show this again in a minute. And then we're going to go to Settings. And right here where it says centimeter, we're going to change this to foot. You'll see the grid here change in the background to mimic that. I'll do this one more time. So here's where it was, and then we're going to foot. You'll see it gets bigger, and then we're going to press save. So again, that's Windows, Settings, Preferences, Preferences, Settings, Linear, Foot, Save. So why did we bother doing that? What does it really matter? In a game model, the unit settings are usually not all that important. Maya will export the file according to the unit setting defined in the exporter. So like if we were actually designing a game, it wouldn't matter so much because we could tweak it there. However, we're working in animation. But if you later end up using any physics in Maya, the real size of the objects do matter. An object will appear to fall off the shelf to the floor much different if Maya thinks the shelf is 3 feet off the floor than if Maya thinks it's 3 miles off the floor. So it's worthwhile to keep things clean from the beginning. Saving incrementally. Incremental saves are absolutely one of the most beautiful and important parts of Maya's structure. What it does is each time you save in Maya, a copy of the last saved version is placed in a folder called Incremental Save before saving and overwriting your file. This means you have a linear history of every save you make within Maya. It seems overly complex for now, but every single semester I have taught, someone has come in with a Maya scene that is listed as 0 kilobytes. Everything they made, it's empty, it's gone. We're never quite sure what causes this or corrupts this file. What we are sure of is that if the student had been using incremental saves, he has lost time for sure, but only since the last save. He doesn't have to start over. It just takes a second to tell Maya to incrementally save the files, but it can save countless hours in the disastrous occasion of corrupted files. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Save Scene option box. We're going to click the incremental save option and then click the Save Scene button. So File, Save Scene option box, and under General Options, we'll press Incremental Save and then Save Scene. And File, Save Scene option box, which is the box here. Under General Options, Incremental Save, and Save Scene. Roughing out the scene. If you have drawing or painting experience, you're probably quite familiar with this idea. With broad strokes, working generic, we're going to construct the bones of the scene. Some of these bones may be altered or even deleted later, but they help to establish scale and make sure the size of walls, floors, and rooms are appropriate. So let's create the hallway floor. we're going to choose Create Polygon Primitives Plane. This will create a 1x1 plane in the middle of the scene, and because we changed our unit to feet, it will be feet. So with the default settings, Maya would make you draw the shape. It doesn't anymore, thankfully. But since we have interaction creation turned off, which it is now by default, it automatically creates the 1x1 plane. So we're just going to go to Create Polygon Primitives Plane. Okay. So if you get a plane that doesn't look like this, just like the one previously in the recording, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Create Polygon Primitives Plane option box. And we're going to change width divisions and height divisions to 1, and then press Create. All right, as Ryder pointed out, you can change this too from the channel box. If you were to go into Polyplane 1, you could edit the subdivision's height and width here. You can also do it via the attribute editor and Polyplane 1 tab. But sometimes it's nicer just to have it as we need from the get-go using the option box. So we're going to adjust the scale.
I hate to interrupt, but mine is...
Okay. So we're going to adjust the scale of the plane to yield a plane that is 8 feet wide by 100 feet long. To do this, with the plane selected, we're going to make sure the channels box is visible, and we're going to change scale X to 8 and scale Z to 100. This is going to be the main size of the main hallway. So it's important to note that changing scale X and scale Z to values 8 and 100 respectively does not guarantee in all cases that an object is actually 8 by 100. However, because we created this plane at 1, 1, scaling it to 8 and 100 times, its one unit does indeed an 8 foot by 100 foot plane. So because we took care to make sure it was 1, 1 to begin with, we are good. So let me show you what that looks like. On the sidebar here, we're going to find the one that says Channels Box Layer Editor. We're going to make sure our plane here is selected. You can do that either by clicking on it or by clicking P-Plane 1 in the outliner. We're going to change scale X to 8 and then press Enter or Return. And we're going to change scale Z to 100, press Enter or Return. Tips and tricks. If the channel box is not visible for some reason, you can toggle its visibility by clicking in the very top right corner of the interface. It's really close to underneath the the close button. So right here, see how this is highlighted? This is the other button for your channel box. So if you notice here, like, hey, my channel box is missing, you press this button here that looks like a stack of sticky notes, and it'll bring back your channel box. Keep the poly count low by ensuring that this plane is only 1 polygon. To do this, in the channel box editor, you click on Polyplane 1 to expand it and under the input section. Make sure the subdivision width and height is 1. So this is what I just mentioned before. We also did that through the options box when creating the plane. So in most cases, having a much more dense default of 10 polygons by 10 polygons would be fine. However, because this is a game model, we want to be ever mindful of keeping the data set small. Part of this effort is wrangling the poly count. If the hull is one big plane, 1 polygon will actually do it. It's not going to be any different if it's 100 polygons. But it's a lot of unnecessary information for video cards to draw. Because it's flat, it's one surface, it really doesn't matter. Yeah. What'll matter is how big the texture size is. And that'll change how clear or how pixelated it is. The poly count won't have an effect on that. So rename the plane to ETM Hallway Floor. There are several ways to do this, but my favorite is via the outliner. Again, if you don't see it, you can go to Window Outliner. There, double click on P-Plane 1 and name it to ETM Hallway Floor. I'll copy paste this into the chat. Okay. So naming your stuff is not just vanity or anal retentiveness. 3D work usually ends up being a group effort, and having well-named objects makes sure people on your team like you. So to open your outliner, you can press this button here underneath your panel views, or you can go to Windows, Outliner. Then where you see P-Plane 1, double click on it, and then type in ETM all caps underscore hallway with a capital H, floor with a capital F, then press enter or return to solidify the name change. All right, we don't need to do that. It is that way by default, unless you still have wireframe on from yesterday, in which case just press 5 on your keyboard. Now we're going to rough out the walls. We're going to create a new cube that will become a wall. We're going to go to create polygons primitive cube, and we want this to be a 1x1 cube sitting at 0, 0, 0 in the seam. So just like we did for the plane, let's go to create polygon primitives cube option box. And then just double check width, height, and depth are 1, and then press create. Again, create polygon primitives cube option box, and double check width, height, and depth divisions are 1, and then press create. Adjusting the manipulator. By default, the manipulator of an object is at its geometric center. This is a logical place to put it, but because the manipulator handle is the point around which the object rotates or scales, having it smack dab in the middle can cause problems in many situations. So for those who remember working in Adobe Animate, this is basically the pivot point. The manipulator handle is the pivot point of 3D objects. So we know when we move the pivot point, how it rotates changes. Same thing here. So for example, consider a door. Most doors do not rotate around the middle of the door, but rather they rotate on the hinges on one of its edges on the side of the door. For doors, we want to definitely have the manipulator handle not in the middle of the door. Another example is the walls we are building. When we created the cube, it is sitting halfway through the floor. In order to get this cube scaled to the right size, we would need to scale it in Y, which means it would grow up and down as it's scaling from the manipulator location in the middle. It would be much easier if the manipulator was at the bottom of the cube, so that as the cube was scaled, it would only grow upward. Having a manipulator for the wall on the bottom will also allow for the wall to be snapped to the hallway floor. So we're going to hit the spacebar and we're going to shift to the 4 view panel layout. With the cube still selected, we're going to move the mouse over each view panel and hit F while in each frame for that cube. So just to focus on it if you don't see it. Shift F will do the same thing. And we'll switch to the move tool. W is the keyboard shortcut to see where the cube's manipulator handle is. In the front view panel, we'll hold the D key down on the keyboard. Notice that the manipulator changes to look something like this. This shows the manipulator handle is ready to be moved or otherwise manipulated. And while still holding D as in dog, that key down, we're going to press and hold the V key to snap to vertex. Now we'll grab the green line of the current manipulator and drag downward to the bottom of the cube. The manipulator should snap to the bottom, and then we'll release both keyboard buttons. So I know that was a lot, so let me break this down for you. We're going to make sure our cube is selected and press F to focus on it. I just want to press F in all of these other views as well so I can very clearly see the cube. So go ahead and take a moment to click on your cube, press spacebar to get to the 4 view panel, and then press F in all the 4 views. Make sure your cube is the focus. All right, so I want to look at either the front or the side view for this next step. We're going to kind of ignore top and persp for right now. I'm going to switch to the move tool, which is W on the keyboard, or you can press the move tool from your toolbar. With the move tool selected, I'm going to hold down D as in dog. Now, when you see that happen, see how the manipulator changes. So just watch first. See how it changes? This means the manipulator handle is ready to be moved. Then I want to hold down V as in Victor. See how the center changes to a circle? This means it's ready to snap to vertice. So I'm going to grab the green handle in either the front or the side view. It might snap to the top first, but I'm just going to make it snap to the bottom by pulling it down. Then I'm going to let go of my mouse, D and V. So one more time, hold down D as in dog to activate the pivot point for moving. Hold down V to snap to vertice. and then click on the green arrow from either front or side view and drag down until it snaps to the bottom of the cube. All right. So lots of things are happening here. First, there is the finger gymnastics of holding down 2 keys at once, but that is a critical step. Holding the D key down tells Maya that the manipulator is to be moved. Holding the V key tells it to snap to nearest vertex. By dragging the green line of the manipulator, we move the manipulator down only in Y. It does not slide off the sides of the cube, but remains right at the bottom middle of the cube. Warnings and pitfalls. There's often a tendency for new Maya users to always grab the middle of the manipulator, the yellow square, when trying to move things. This seems intuitive, but it means that the object being grabbed can move in any direction. So for instance, in this case, if the manipulator, even while holding down D and V, is grabbed by the yellow square, it will snap to one of the corners of the cube and not stay in the middle. This is because the yellow square means it can move in all directions and will move in all directions towards the nearest vertex.